So today also brings home the hard assignment of measuring and accountability. Profit and loss is like air and water to business. Progress to goals, using disaggregated statistics and public reporting needs to be the air and water of the international community and of civil society's development work as well. So picking up on Liz's point about engaging men and the gripping issues that end violence against women, we couldn't have had a more custom-ordered speaker, and he's one of the best that we've got, than Michael Kaufman, who's one of the pioneers among male leaders to work shoulder to shoulder with women to engage men, bringing them in as partners. And in fact, he's the original male champion of change. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Kaufman.
Well, I'm here to talk about gender equality. That must mean I'm here to talk about women, right? I mean, that's what gender is about, isn't it? Well, I want to do something special today. And what I'd like to do is to talk about the missing piece in the gender equation. I want to make men visible. Now, in making men visible in talking about gender, because of course gender is not just about one half of the species, it's about all of us. And gender is not just about who we are, it's about relations of power. In making men visible as part of that, of course, I'm going to be raising some critical comments about the attitudes, the behaviors of some men. But I want to be really clear, particularly to the men who are here. I don't think that men are a bunch of monsters. I don't think that men are a bunch of dolts. I don't think that when we talk about men as part of the gender equation, that it's about pointing a finger. It's not about collective blame, collective guilt. It's certainly not about calling in the politically correct police or something like that. But at the same time, I do think we need a clear message to men that men should not be scared of powerful women. So what is my talk all about? Well, I want to talk about some of the perhaps surprising reasons why gender equality is an issue for men. I want to talk about why it's not just about women winning and men losing, but about women winning, but also men benefiting too. I want to talk about how the men who are here in this audience, still minority, but we are here, and men listening in, and what those men and what the men in your companies, to all the women in this room, what the men in your companies can do to make a big difference in the lives of women, to make a difference too in the well-being of men, and in the health, the productivity of your organizations, your communities, and your countries. Well, let's just dive into it then. Let me start by telling you a story. The most wonderful moment of my life was when my son was born. Now, I just have to pause here. A couple of you know that I also have a daughter, at which point you must be thinking, what a sexist, she's looking at me, what a sexist creep. I have to tell you, my daughter is a stepdaughter, and for some reason her parents didn't invite me to the birth. I don't know why, but anyway. So the most wonderful moment of my life was when my son was born. So there we were in the delivery room, and my kid had been born 5 seconds, and I didn't yet know if it was a boy or a girl. Now, I'm not dumb, I do know the difference, but at that point I had so many tears in my eyes, I couldn't see the little thing, and I mean the little thing on the little thing. I didn't know if it was a boy or girl until the nurse spoke. Now, picture the scene. Until that moment, she had been speaking in her normal voice, and suddenly this nurse, her voice dropped down really deep, and she said, "It's a boy, what a strong little fellow." I was totally shocked. Not because it was a boy. I'd taken high school biology. I figured there was sort of a 50-50 chance of that, but I was shocked by the change of her voice and what she said. I knew if it had been a girl, her voice would have gone up even higher, and she would have said, "What a sweet little thing." My kid was 5 seconds old, and he was being fitted for his first football jersey or something. Now, it's true, he was a strong little thing, but he was also the most sweet, beautiful creature that ever squirmed its way onto the planet. But that's what happens to you and I from the moment of birth. You and I are systematically held differently, talked to differently, with a whole range of different expectations about our lives as women and men. Now, those expectations, those assumptions, aren't arbitrary. Because what they do is they reflect a social reality. They don't reflect a physical reality, because, as I say, my baby was strong and gorgeous and beautiful and sweet. They reflect a social reality, and that social reality is life in a male-dominated society. Now, there are folks out there who say, okay, yeah, I get that for the past. We did used to live in male-dominant societies, but don't we live in a post-feminist, gender-equitable world now? And of course, we say, not quite yet. You know, we still live in a world, after all, where men make, you know, depending on the country, 120%, 140%, 150% of what women make. We still live in a world in which most of our political and governing bodies are run by men. This is my current favorite page. This is the North Korean Parliament, or whatever they call it. I don't know. Anyway, we still live in a world in which most of our political leaders, our religious leaders, are men. We live in a world in which men run the economies of the world. And let me just add what a great job my half of the species has been doing on the economic front in recent years. We still live in a world in which our biggest sports heroes and figures are men. Where men are supposed to, you know, lead the way, be in charge. And of course, where we're supposed to dominate women. And meanwhile, those women, well, what are they supposed to be doing? Well, yeah, it's true, you're working now, but, you know, quote unquote working now, you know, but what about this work? What about this work in the home? In spite of some real changes in many countries, women still are saddled with the bulk of housework and childcare. Right here in the US, for example, every single day, women average 101 minutes of routine housework and childcare a day. Men, sorry, I had that backwards. Women do 167 minutes a day. Men do just 101 minutes a day. That's an hour difference a day. And what that does is it's a barrier to women's advancement, women's education. In some countries, the difference is even greater. In India, women do 10 times the housework and childcare men do. In South Africa and Japan, it's 8 times as much. This huge, huge gap. So in other words, we have cultures still, in spite of some incredible changes, where men are supposedly doing the important work, while women are, you know, cheering on from the sidelines. And what about work? Well, we still have a whole series of ongoing problems. We've got ongoing problem of sexual harassment at the workplace. And as you know, it's not usually, certainly in many countries, this blatant, but it's still such a pressing problem, often in its more subtle forms of unwanted behavior. We still have the problem of job ghettos. Women in occupations that are not rewarded as much, don't have the prestige as much. We still have those problems. We still have the problem, we saw a slide yesterday from McKinsey, of this, you know, the pipeline of women almost equal at the entry level in professional positions. By the time you get to the top, only 17%. Let me get to this next page. So the result of all this is we have more men at the top. We have more men at the top of our companies, our organizations, our governments. We still live in a patriarchal society. Now, in spite of some great achievements, and I mean really great achievements that we should celebrate in recent years, led by courageous women around the world, changes that are having an impact on the lives of women, but also starting to have an impact on the lives of men. In spite of that, we're still raising boys to fit into a set of expectations about what it means to be a real man. From birth, we're raising our sons to fit into this, certain ideas of strength and power. We teach them to be risk takers and warriors. We teach them to fight. We teach them to take the pain and show no fear. Don't show too many feelings, because you won't be a real man. We teach men to be rugged individuals. You don't need help, you're a real man. Even when you're dying of lung cancer, you don't need help. You know, so we bombard boys with these images. Now, it's true, we're making progress. We're making progress in changing these norms and expectations, but in spite of that, at the same time as we're making progress, we're also doing something that's pretty nefarious. And that is, right now, these days, we are supersizing masculinity. What do I mean by that? Well, here's a picture. of my superheroes when I was a boy. Now, if I show this picture now in a school, the boys go absolutely hysterical. They say, those flabby middle-aged men are superheroes? Are you nuts? But in all seriousness, when I was a kid, those, and Joe too, he's going, yeah, those are our images of invincible masculinity. We could only imagine, we could only fantasize about being that powerful, that super heroic. We couldn't pull it off. If we couldn't pull off that, imagine a boy now trying to pull this off. Or here's another example. Here's this is a boy toy, I guess. This is the original G.I. Joe, a soldier action figure. Here's the original one in the 60s, and here's G.I. Joe now. For those at the back who can't quite see it, there's a pectoral close-up. Here's another one. Here's the original, from Star Wars, the Luke Skywalker action figure, and here's Luke Skywalker now. So we've supersized masculinity. We've set up, these images of what a real man is supposed to be. This is my other job. I am a Calvin Klein model in my, but most men can't fit into that. Let's face it. It's not just the physical stuff, although that's very much there. But this idea that men are supposed to always be strong, always powerful, always in control, no fear, no emotions, no weakness. And when we men can't live up to that, we humiliate them. We say to boys who fall down and cry, stand up, big boys don't cry, act like a man. We humiliate boys, we humiliate men who are not playing the man game, who are not in the box. The result of this, the result of all this bombarding boys and men with these impossible expectations of manhood, combined with humiliation, is it literally tears men apart. Men die younger. Men engage in more risk-taking, dangerous risk-taking behavior, are more likely to be in prison, or more likely to be addicted to alcohol and other drugs. More men use violence than women, physical, sexual, emotional violence, to prove to themselves, to prove to women, and to prove to other men that I am a real man. Do you see the paradox in what I'm saying? We live in a world where we still have unequal power between women and men. We still live in a world where men have a set of privileges just by birth. But the incredible paradox here is the way that male-dominated societies have structured ourselves, have structured the lives of men, comes with a cost, not only rewards to men, but a cost to men ourselves. It is a totally bizarre paradox, but that's the paradox we live in. Now that paradox, I want to be clear, that pain that some men feel, all men feel on one level, is not an excuse. It's not an excuse for violence, it's not an excuse for sexism, but it's an explanation, it's an understanding. So why should men in business and beyond support gender equality? Well, first of all, it's the right thing to do. I was giving a talk last year in Australia. I was doing a speaking tour there. I was giving a talk to the National Rugby Association. And there we were in the Rugby Hall of Fame. And I was speaking to players, coaches, and team owners. And I was speaking about ending violence against women and why the rugby league, the NRL, should speak out against violence. And I had in my notes, this is the point where I posed the question to the group, why should you speak out against violence? And I had in my notes, this is when the business case comes up. It costs us money when we lose players. It's bad publicity. We want to attract more women spectators, on and on. I had this. So I posed this question, ready to hear the business case, but instead, this one bloke gets up, a rugby player. I don't know if you've ever stood near a rugby player. They are massive. He wasn't taller than me, but his neck alone was wider than my shoulders. He was a big, big guy. But he just sort of oozed this sort of sweet demeanor, though. And, anyway, I posed a question. So why should you speak up? Still expecting the business case. And he just sort of looked at me like I wasn't understanding something. And he just said, well, because it's the right thing to do. And he sat down. The first reason why we need my brothers to speak out, and your co-workers and men in your life to speak out for gender equality, is it's the right thing to do. We also know that our economies will benefit. We know that women will have greater opportunities, will have more autonomy. We know that our families will benefit from family-friendly policies, and we know that men will escape the harmful effects of the ways we've defined manhood. In other words, men have things to give up, but we also have much to gain. So let's turn to the workplace. Let's turn to the workplace. And I want to share with you the type of things that I share when I speak to men in businesses and professional firms and so on. And sort of an action plan, a 4-point action plan of things that I believe that men as leaders need to do. First of all, make a personal commitment to be a workplace leader for gender equality. What does that mean? It means that promoting gender equality is a key part of your leadership. This is not an add-on. This is not something to do next year, next month, next whenever. This is a key part of your leadership. Second thing, to be part of the change. Not just say the right things, but do the right things. This is a picture of Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook, who took advantage of his company's 2-month parental leave policy to take time off with his new kid. I think that the map behind him, those are the countries he owns. Anyway, but be part of the change. To inspire, motivate, and challenge. Motivate and challenge women to be leaders, but also inspire, motivate, and challenge other men to be leaders in promoting gender equality. Say to the men, take the pledge. I see it as my job to create a gender equitable, harassment-free, and family-friendly workplace. That's the first thing. Second thing that men have got to do is work to understand. Why? Well, these are really complex issues. These are complex issues. And so men have got to really work hard to understand these issues, but also because there's going to be opposition. There's going to be opposition if they start speaking out for gender equality. So what are some of the things that men need to work to understand? Well, first of all, of course, the business case for gender equality, and we've heard a lot already, some wonderful presentations yesterday. Companies are going to do better. Our economies are going to do better. There is a strong business case. We need men to understand and encourage men to understand, in spite of progress, the ways that women are still second-class citizens all over the world. We have to help men understand that listening is key. Just like if I want to understand about problems of racism, for example, who am I going to turn to? Am I going to turn to another white person? Or am I going to turn to a person of color who's going to talk to me about his or her experiences? So listening for men is key to understand women's experiences. To understand, one of the things we hear is the subtle ways that sexism gets passed on. Also to understand that some women and some men face multiple barriers to equality, things such as racism and homophobia. But also understand that men's lives are changing. And so this is not only a negative message about this problem and this problem, but the positive message that men's lives are changing. I love this Pew survey a couple years ago where they asked men and women about, this first column is being a good parent, how they value it. The second column, successful marriage. Third column, success at a high-paying job or career or profession. Men and women were now saying the same thing. It's quite an extraordinary social change. So we've got to understand those things. The third thing, male leaders have got to do a company checkup. And what does that mean? Well, it means to make sure that policies are in place. Policies around hiring and advancement through the ranks, around harassment, family-friendly policies, policies around the impact of violence against women in the workplace. With managers, that there's training, there's mentorship programs, that this is part of the performance evaluations of managers and the performance evaluations that managers do. The companies are finding effective ways to prevent and respond to harassment, not just through punishment, but focusing on prevention, focusing on taking inappropriate workplace behavior and using it as an educational opportunity. I wish I had time to talk to you more about it. Write me an email and I'll send you some articles about that. What else do we need to do? We need to monitor and measure, and we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate because you know why? Change happens not because there's a problem. That's not why change happens, because we've long had problems. Change happens when people know there's an alternative that they can help achieve. That's when change happens. And so that's why it's critical that we celebrate our achievements collectively. And the fourth thing is making a public commitment to lead. This photograph again, comes from Australia. This is Australia Day. The Australian Armed Forces and the Air Force have been working with the White Ribbon Campaign in Australia and their workplace accreditation program. And they decided, aside from policies and training, this and that, to make a public statement. They were going to paint white ribbon on some of their planes that were flying around the world and across Australia. So celebrating that, making that public commitment to lead. So, this is what we need to do. We've got to sort of find ways to talk about the transformation of men's lives, but also ways to encourage men to speak out as leaders, whether it's things like he for she, or campaigns like I've been involved in, the White Ribbon campaign around the world, encouraging men, or in some countries, men and women, to speak out against violence against women. Well, I want to just end with a story or two. We think, okay, yeah, that sounds really good, Michael. Good plan, Michael. But, come on, let's get serious. Are we really going to be able to pull this off? I have the opportunity to stand in front of groups of men very often. And, sometimes I'll be speaking at a company sales conference, or, senior management, or a community talk, or something in a school. And so the men come in, there are men and women come in, and, they think, particularly the men, that gender equality or violence against women, they're going to be crapped on for the next hour. That's what they assume. So some of them sit down and they sort of lean back, foot up, arms crossed, looking, daggers, and and then I start talking. I do talk about inequality and oppression, but I also talk about the impossible demands on manhood. And I watch those guys, because they're my barometer, and I watch them as their arms drop down. And they start leaning forward, and very carefully so their buddy next to them doesn't see, they start nodding. Because what's happening is they are hearing something that they thought for their whole life that only they experienced. They thought they were the only guy on the planet who couldn't live up to these expectations of manhood. They thought they were the only one who couldn't always be strong, always be powerful, always be in control, always have the answers, and have that Calvin Klein body as well. They thought they were the only one. And suddenly they're hearing, wait a minute, the very world that we've set up, the men have set up to give us more power and privilege, comes with a cost for men ourselves. I can't live up to this. I thought I was the only one. Men have waited their whole life to hear this message about equality, about change, about the capacity for change. And you might think, okay, that's fine. Here we are in New York. Here you are wherever. But what about, is this really translatable around the world? So let me finish with one story from the remote Swat Valley of Pakistan. And when I first heard this story a number of years ago, I hadn't even heard of the Swat Valley. It's described as this remote tribal area. You've all heard of it now. That's where Malala is from. So I met this guy. He had gone off to university to become a lawyer, gone off to the capital. While he was studying, there was a coup d'etat. And the general who came to power to curry favor with the more fundamentalist types proclaimed something called the Hudud Ordinance. And the Hudud Ordinance, one of the provisions said this: if a woman was raped, to prove it, she had to come up with 4 male witnesses, which of course she could never do. At which point she would be charged with adultery, and she would be then thrown into prison or even executed. Okay, so this guy graduates, he comes back to his community, he sees this happening to women, and he says, wait a minute, this isn't right. This isn't what I've been learning all these years, is Pakistani law. And he also says, because of course he's a Muslim, he says, this isn't what my religion is about, he says. He decides to start defending these women, and he wins. He gets them off these charges. Well, the response of the powers that be was to trump up a charge and throw him into prison. Now, I don't know if any of you here have ever been, not in prison, but into a prison. But prisons, whether in the Swat Valley or right here, are the worst places on the planet. But you can only imagine the total hellhole they threw this man into. You can only imagine. It gets worse because you can probably imagine what happened to that man when he was thrown into prison. You can probably imagine what the other male prisoners did when they found out what he was doing. And whatever you just imagined, you probably got it wrong, because when the other male prisoners found out that he was in prison for defending the women in their communities, they all went on a hunger strike. And they said, we are not going to eat until you release our brother from prison, and they won. Wow. If they can pull that off, in a prison in the remote Swat Valley of Pakistan, think what you can do. Think what you can do in your countries around the world. Think what you can do in your communities, in your corporations, in your professional firms, in your trade unions. Think of the possibilities. Think of the possibilities in countries with powerful women's movements that we can all draw such strength from and inspiration from. And as we do this, as we draw men into this struggle, this winnable struggle for equality, for equity, for liberation, as we do that, what we are doing together is creating a better world for women. But you know what? We're also creating a better world for men. And most important of all, we're creating a far, far, far better world for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. You've really provided the fuel for the day, and I hope the men are listening, and I hope the women are listening too.